Okay, welcome everyone to today's broadcast. This is Maria Blaise Costello. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I hope the weather is behaving where you are. Today's topic is Connecticut and Massachusetts upcoming solicitations for resilient powered microgrids. And this webinar is being broadcast on behalf of the State and Federal Energy Storage Technology Advancement Partnership, or ESTAP. So before we begin, I just quickly want to go over a housekeeping slide with all of you. Today, all of our participants are in listen-only mode, so you will not be able to speak throughout the broadcast. It's recommended that you connect to the audio portion of the webinar using VoIP in your computer speakers or a USB-type headset, and you can avoid telephone charges. But you can connect by telephone if you'd wish, and if you do connect by telephone, we'd appreciate it if you enter in the PIN number shown on the audio box into your telephone keypad. So if you're going to use USB, hit speakers and microphone for your audio, and if you're going to be by telephone, select the telephone button. We're going to ask that all of our participants today ask any questions that you may have at any time during the broadcast by typing them into the question box that you'll see on the webinar console. So please type in your question and hit send. It will go to our moderator. He will queue them up and will ask your questions as time allows following both of today's guest speaker presentations. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be made available after today's event on the CESA website. You can go to www.cleanenergystates.org under events, find today's event name, click on that, and you should see at the bottom the webinar recording and also the presentation slides. So we should have those up by the end of the day today. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn this over to Todd Olinsky-Paul. Todd is the project director for the ESTAP project, and he'll be today's moderator. So Todd, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Maria. This is Todd Olinsky-Paul from CESA. I'm going to do a brief introduction here before turning it over to the main presenters. First, I would like to thank Dr. Emery Zhuk from the U.S. Department of Energy and Dan Borneo from Sandia National Laboratories. They support our ESTAP program, which is our energy storage program, and make it possible for us to do these webinars. Next slide, please. So just for those of you who may be wondering what ESTAP is, ESTAP is a project of CESA. It's under contract with Sandia and funded by DOE. And CESA is stands for Clean Energy States Alliance, and we are a nonprofit, and we basically work with state clean energy funds to help them implement their policies and programs. Next slide, please. So, now that we've identified who we are, ESTAP stands for Energy Storage Technology Advancement Partnership. And its purpose is basically to help bring states to the table to partner with DOE and create energy storage programs and support energy storage deployments. Next slide, please. So we'd have two key activities. One is we disseminate information to stakeholders, such as we're doing in this webinar. The other is that we facilitate public-private partnerships at the state level to support energy storage demonstration project development. And also, we support state programs in the areas of energy storage, resilient power, and microgrids, and try to help states to develop these programs in a way that will be successful and ultimately, we hope, result in lots of good projects. Next slide, please. So as an example of the webinars, and these are, as Maria said, all archived on our website. You can go back and look at them. We do policy webinars and technology webinars. You can see a few examples here of some recent ones. And as I said, they are all archived with audio, and we will give you that URL a little later. Next slide, please. And so that's the webinar side of things, and now the project side of things. Just to give an idea, these are some of the locations where we are currently working with states on projects and programs involving energy storage. You can see it's pretty much all over the map. And it's a very hot topic right now, so we have constantly new programs joining and asking for technical assistance, and we do the best we can to help everybody. Next slide, please. So with that out of the way, I'd like to introduce the guest speakers for today. We're going to start with the Connecticut crew, and I will introduce our speaker from Massachusetts after the Connecticut presentation. So from Connecticut, we have Alex Craigie and Veronica Szydrzykowski. Alex is the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, or DEEP, and he focuses on energy issues. Previously, he was Vice President of the Coalition for Green Capital, which is a national nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. He served on the Obama-Biden transition team in 2008 to 2009 and worked on the Obama presidential campaign in 2008. Veronica works at DEEP as well in the Bureau of Energy and Technology Policy. She is the program coordinator for Connecticut's Microgrid Program, which is what is going to be presented today. And she previously was a utilities examiner in the Department of Public Utility Control for 18 years. So next slide, please. So I'm going to hand it over to Alex and Veronica, and I just want to remind everybody, please do enter any questions in writing as they occur to you. Don't hold them to the end. There's a lot of people on this webinar, and we'd like to get to the questions, all the questions we can. It'll help me if you type them in as they occur to you. So with that, I will hand this over to Alex and Veronica.
Thanks so much, Todd, and greetings to everyone from very snowy Hartford, where it's really coming down, and I think we're sending it up to our colleagues in Massachusetts a little bit later in the day, but appreciate everyone taking the time out of their busy days to hear about what we're doing with our Microgrids program in Connecticut. I want to start, if I could go to the next slide, please. So we can advance one more. I want to start by giving folks some background on what we've been dealing with in Connecticut, and this probably is going to sound familiar to a lot of people on the line. We've really just been pasted over the past 3 years with severe weather events. We had a terrible series of snowstorms in the winter of 2010 into the winter of 2011. We had a tropical storm, Irene, in 2011, as well as a really bizarre October snowstorm that seemed to pick out Connecticut as its target and left pretty much everyone else alone, in which we got about a foot of snow in October while all the trees had their leaves on, which caused a tremendous amount of power outages when trees came down because of the added weight from the snow and ice that built up on the trees. So we had about 800,000 people without power during that storm for an extended period of time. We also dealt with the effects of Superstorm Sandy. We didn't bear the brunt of the storm as New York and New Jersey did, but we certainly felt some pretty severe impacts. And then just last year we had a very strong blizzard that left a lot of folks in the dark, and I wouldn't be shocked if the weather that's occurring outside my window has a similar result this time. The duration of power outages have just been very difficult, challenging rather. We've gone up to 10 days at a time without power, and it's naturally left folks very frustrated with the lack of power. If I could go to the next slide, please. Here you get some sketches of what we've been dealing with, but it really has been a rough 3 years in terms of severe weather. Go to the next slide, please. We've been dealing with a somewhat predictable cycle of response to severe weather in the past, which is folks get very mad and express their frustration, and policymakers, including elected officials and regulatory officials, scramble around and try and find some way to be responsive. Somebody it brings up the idea of undergrounding power lines, and like clockwork, that quiets everyone down very quickly when people start seeing the billions and billions of dollars associated with the price tag of building this out. And generally, things tend to quiet down after that and stay quiet. But in Connecticut, we've really had a brutal series of events that have not allowed us the I don't want to say luxury, but the ability to move past some of these severe weather events because they come so quickly on each other's heels. If I could go to the next slide, please. We wanted to try something different in Connecticut. We wanted to be responsive to the concerns of our residents while acknowledging that we're not going to be able to prevent all power outages. We're not going to be able to ensure that our residents have uninterrupted power because the price tag would be outrageous, to be frank. And we're not interested in subjecting our ratepayers to that kind of pain in the wallet. So what we did was we tried to focus on where we could, the margins, where we could make a difference. And we decided that we wanted to create a program that was going to improve the safety and quality of life for residents in a large-scale outage situation. So we've essentially said we can't keep the power on all the time, but what we can do is provide some critical services as well as some quality of life services that will ensure a better experience during a large-scale outage situation. If I could go to the next slide, please. We've started building out this network of microgrids. Veronica's going to get a little bit more into the details, but we really have, out of our first round of our program, come out with a really strong cross-section of different examples of microgrids, from campus style to downtown network, which includes maybe a bank or a gas station or a grocery store. But it's something that has gone very well thus far for us, and we are, as Veronica will detail, excited to cut the ribbon on our first project in the beginning of March, and we expect the rest of them to sprout up in linear fashion after that. If we could go to the next slide. So what are we looking for in microgrids in Connecticut? We're trying to not just be in a situation where we're paying for backup generation. We wanted to create our program so that it would integrate 24/7 distributed generation sources. We're talking about natural gas turbines with combined heat and power. We're talking about fuel cells specifically, and also working in, and I think we can work in more and more as the market matures, zero emissions renewable technologies like solar panels. And we're especially excited and grateful for the work that the DOE and Todd and others are working on in the realm of energy storage, so that it can become more of a reality to have a solar-powered microgrid as we move down this path. We want to be able to keep this small network of critical facilities up and running when the larger grid goes down. We want it to be built in a way that is not brutal on taxpayers or ratepayers' wallets. And we especially want to structure it in a way that encourages market development to the point where we won't have to, in a couple of years, be putting any public capital into the projects. We look at this program as a set of training wheels, really, for the market to allow it to grow and become a force. And then eventually we envision it being an entirely private sector story. We haven't figured out exactly how that's going to work, but it's starting to come more and more into focus. You can see a lot of promise in a utility-centered business model. You can see a lot of promise in a private, non-utility, private sector-owned business model. But we're in the process of sprinting across that minefield and finding out where the trouble is and getting past it. So it's proving to be a very useful exercise here in Connecticut. We need the projects that we fund to contribute to public good. That's a pretty simple concept. They have to deliver some value to the residents of the municipality that they are in. We can't just be doing this to keep folks' lights on in their apartment buildings, which would be nice, and I would appreciate it, especially today. But we have to be able to provide some critical service, such as a police station, a fire station, a cell tower, or the downtown model that I referred to with those quality of life enhancers, so like a gas station or a bank or a pharmacy. And we do believe that it is an important piece of a microgrid is connecting more than just one critical facility to these distributed generation resources that are islandable. We don't want to be in the position of just having one one facility being kept up. We'd like to create a true network of facilities. And now I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Veronica, who's going to take it from here.
Good afternoon, everyone. So to follow up on what Alex was just getting into with these critical facilities, he's mentioned through a lot of these, and I think the key to our program is that this is all for the benefit of the municipalities, and whatever the critical facility is determined by the municipality. So if it's their town hall and their police station, if it's they want to keep a grocery store and a gas station and a high school up, so whatever combination of these facilities, all are at the desire of the local municipality to determine. So next slide. So we started this program in early summer of 2013, and our first round, lots of new things going on. We ended up deciding to fund 9 projects, which you've probably all heard about by now, but they range from the different campus-style town centers, including grocery stores. We've had the school campuses in here. So these projects are all in various stages of development, and what I'm really excited about today is that we have executed contracts with 4 of them. Alex mentioned we have one that is going to do a ribbon cutting. Wesleyan is doing a ribbon cutting on March 6th, so that's going to be our first one to officially come online. The rest of the projects are all in various stages of contract negotiation and or actual development. So the round 1 projects are certainly moving forward, and then we need to take the lessons learned from that. So if we go to the next slide. So we had, like I said, been doing this for just over just about a year now that we've been working on this, and we have lots of strengths and lots of opportunities or lessons learned. So this, as Alex has mentioned, has started from the governor right on down, who supports this program, gave us another $30 million in funding to continue the program. We've selected our projects from this evaluation process we've gone through, including expert advice from our local utilities as well as our technical consultants. And especially coming up to round 2, we're involving even more, like the CESA team is going to be more involved. Our Connecticut Energy Finance Investment Authority is going to be more involved. So we're bringing in these experts from all over to help us with the program and as it matures to make it an even better program. So one of the most important lessons that we learned from that first round was working with the municipalities and working within the confines or the restrictions or their needs directly, meeting their needs directly. So they needed access to more information. They need more technical help, all things that we're going to bring in round 2. The financing support for the generation. Our Connecticut Microgrid Program will only fund the design, the engineering, and the interconnection infrastructure costs. As we're getting more of this clean and renewable generation into the mix of the microgrids, that needs financing. We're working very closely with CESA and anybody else who has access to financing for the generation to make all of these projects cost effective. So it might still end up net costing the town some money to put in a microgrid, but they're going to get some benefit out of having that resilient power. But we're really working hard to make the round 2 programs much more cost effective. So on to the next slide.
Veronica, this is Todd. Can I just ask you if you would inform people who don't know what CESA is a little bit about them and their role? So you mentioned them.
Sure. CESA is our Clean Energy Finance Investment Authority, also known as the Green Bank, as I mentioned them here on the next slide as well. They have access to funding sources, private capital, for a whole host of programs that they are involved in on the clean energy front. For our microgrid program, as they learn more and more about what the needs of the project proponents are and what type of generation could be used, what kind of systems that they want to employ, they're going to go out and try to secure capital, work with the project proponents and their sources of private capital to secure this capital in a way that makes these projects cost effective. So they're ramping up what they're learning about the program and how they can best assist the individual projects. They're not working directly through DEEP on that because our program is not funding the generation, but they are working in coordination with us to assist the projects that come to them. You know, anybody is welcome to contact CEFIA, explain what their program is or the project is, what their needs are, and CEFIA is willing to work with them to find the sources of capital that will make their project fundable. So on slide 12 here then, this round 2 now. So as I mentioned, we have an additional $30 million over the next 2 years that the governor's authorized. It was passed in our legislative session in 2013. $15 million for what we're calling round 2, $15 million for the next round after that. We launched the second round of this program in October of 2013 with just an initial timeline, initial thought process of where we're looking to go with the program. We've refined our procedures as to what we're going to do. We are mostly taking the multiple steps that we did in the first round. We had a request for information, a project feasibility application, and then a request for proposals, and combining that into a 2-step request for proposals, where the first review of the proposals that come in will be reviewed against a set of must-meet threshold criteria, such as they must be able to be, have 24/7 generation, grid-connected mode. They must have clean generation. There's various thresholds that will come out in the program as it rolls out as to what those threshold criteria are. And then for the projects that meet all of those threshold criteria, they will be reviewed against a more detailed set of criteria, similar to what we did in the last round. How technically efficient are they? How do they connect with the distribution grid? How do they actually work between their facilities? And to make sure all that works and that they have the funding or the financing in place, or that they really do have access to that financing. So as I said, with that, we're going to be working very closely. The projects will work very closely with CEFIA, our green bank, to find access to that financing. And then another set of events that we'll be doing for the municipalities in round 2 are participating in webinars such as this to provide information out to project components. There's more technical support on a general level available from Pace University, from our utilities. We are going to be working with our technical consultant to hold a webinar directly on, how a microgrid works, what they need to do to put together a microgrid. It's going to be coming up to help the municipalities. So lots of technical support for the design, the development, and the financing of projects that we hope to see in this next round. So next slide. So what is our round 2 program shaping up to be? First of all, beginning back in December, we sent out our first set of frequently asked questions, and just a couple days ago sent out a couple more frequently asked questions out to our distribution list. They're all posted along with all the program information from round 1 and round 2 on our website, which there's a link to it at the end of this presentation. If you are not on our distribution list and already getting this information, my email is at the end as well. Drop me a line. We will add you to the list so that you can continue to get program information. So the frequently asked questions are run the gamut of whatever they would have to questions on. The last set that we just sent out, a couple of questions on procurement policies of municipalities and how to go about getting developer assistance in their microgrids. And one of the things I just want to mention now is that now is the time for anybody who wants to get into the program. They can issue, if their procurement staff in their locale allows them, they can issue a request for qualifications to start now digging through the masses of potential developers that are out there to find one that might fit best with what they're looking for. So when DEEP does issue the RFP for the actual proposals, they can have somebody that they can go to work out their contract with them. So that's a piece of information we definitely wanted to get out to bodies now to be thinking about the program ahead of our RFP issue. Coming up in next week, as a matter of fact, we're going to have a meet and greet located at our offices in Hartford, where project proponents and developers can get together and literally meet each other. And while DEEP is not promoting or endorsing any of these individual people that might come to the event, it's a way for those folks to meet each other and do their due diligence and potentially select contractors and host sites to get together. So that event, like I said, is next week, February 19th, 5:30 to 7:30, in the Phoenix Auditorium in our offices in Hartford. And if you want to attend, it's because it's not actually being hosted by us. It's being hosted by I'm sorry, Alex. Who's it's another clean energy group. But you respond to Jackie Rowe.
Energy and Efficiency Business Association here.
REBA. So you would respond to Jackie Rowe at 860-240-6140 or jrowe@murthalaw.com to be in attendance for that event itself. So the next thing that comes up is our second round RFP, which we're targeting an issue date of the first week of March 2014. We're working really hard to incorporate those lessons learned from the first round to make it more user-friendly for our municipal proponents to get involved in the process. And so that RFP has come out in March, and then a save the date for our bidders conference will be March 20th, also at the Phoenix Auditorium in Hartford. So if you want to be in attendance with that, that invitation itself will come out in a little while with when the RFP is issued. So next slide, please. So as as the topic for this webinar, this is our microgrid program. It is part of a larger resiliency strategy within the state of Connecticut. There's various things happening nationwide with various resilience power situations. Our program, we would like to enhance the safety and the quality of life for the residents, whether it be through municipal facilities themselves that keep those services up and running, keeps the local grocery store, the gas station going so that we can all power our generators, which we don't like to mention at DEEP because it's an air quality situation, but we do need to have those services available. And we're employing more cleaner generation, more reliable generation. We're going to have an enhanced grid for Connecticut for the future. And I think that is it for me. Alex, do you want to add?
I don't. I think we've taken up enough folks' time, and I'm eager to hear what Massachusetts has to say.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Alex and Veronica. We are going to go ahead with the next presentation from Massachusetts. I want to let people know, because we have gotten a number of questions about the Connecticut program, that we will answer your questions. We do have them, and we are going to get to them at the end. If you haven't sent your question in yet, or if something else occurs to you, please do as we go, because we have 148 people online right now on this webinar, and we want to get to as many of the questions as we can. Even if we have to go a little over at the end of the hour, we will, but we need you to send them in. Okay, so moving along, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Amy McGuire. She is a project coordinator in the Renewable Energy Division at the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources. She's leading DOER's new initiative in energy resiliency, as well as supporting the solar carve-out program efforts to facilitate residential financing. She has a BS degree in Earth Systems with a concentration in renewable energy from Stanford University, and a master's degree in public administration in environmental science and policy from the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. And while she was there, she conducted research on hybrid vehicles with the Natural Resources Defense Council. She's previously worked at ICF International in San Francisco as an associate in the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Division. Amy comes to DOER most recently from professional cycling, which I was unaware, where she enjoyed success in both the U.S. and international circuits. She retired from cycling this past fall. So with that, I will turn it over to Amy McGuire to talk about the Massachusetts program.
Hi, everyone. This is Amy. Thank you, Todd, for that introduction. It's very nice. And thank you for having me. I'm very pleased to be here. And it was great to hear everything that Connecticut has been working very hard on. We're trying our best to learn as much as we can from them as we are just developing our program. So I'll dive right in. We in Massachusetts really do see this as a way of getting our heads out of the sand, so to speak, and addressing the realities of climate change. And we know it's time to act. Sort of as Alex was describing, we haven't been hit quite as hard as other New England states and other states around the country, but that was more by luck than anything else. And the severe weather has been the leading cause of power outages across the country, and it's getting expensive in dollars, but as well as human and environmental costs. So we know we need to start addressing these issues more, I guess, completely. Again, here, just sort of reiterating this Boston sea rise projection, for example, makes it quite apparent that there is a new reality of climate change and we need to prepare for it. So we have, through the leadership of Governor Patrick, we have some key state law and policy drivers for taking that action, and all of which are guiding our work in the resiliency effort. But most importantly, climate preparedness has become a top priority. So to get to the sort of meat of the issue, there's a coordinated climate preparedness initiatives across the state and across the state agencies. A number of us are working hard on this issue, be it the EEA, the DPU, and us here at the DOER working on our Community Clean Energy Resilience Grant Program, which is what I hope you're all here to hear about. So ours is a $40 million grant program, and we, as I said, are in the development phase of that, but we're focused on municipal efforts to prepare for energy emergencies, and we're focused on using clean energy technologies for that. Get into a little more detail on that. Specifically, we are working to ensure resilience at critical facilities in municipalities, and as I said, using clean energy technologies. We, similarly to Connecticut, are going to allow the municipalities to sort of tell us what their critical facilities are. But we defined that as buildings or structures where loss of electrical service would result in disruption of a critical public safety life-sustaining function. And that sort of long-winded definition sort of leads us to the prioritization of sort of some categories of critical facilities. We see it as life safety resources, be it police, fire, hospitals, wastewater treatment plants, emergency communication resources, and shelters. There's also sort of a category of lifeline resources, be it food supply or transportation, and then community resources as well are very important in this. So that's not to say that we won't look at projects in any of these categories, but sort of an initial prioritization, so to speak. And we're looking at, for eligible clean technologies, we're looking at projects that might incorporate clean generation like distributed renewable energy, heating, electric, as well as heating and cooling, things like CHP and district energy systems, and natural gas high efficiency fuel cells as well. We're also looking at the energy storage component, and as well as energy management systems that will help us not only prepare in advance of an emergency event to minimize the load at a facility, but then should an emergency occur, a facility be able to switch off to just the bare bones of necessary power. And then, of course, islanding technology will be key to any projects, and we're also very interested in microgrids. So that sort of encompasses all of the above. But I guess where we might differ from Connecticut is that we're looking at both the comprehensive, more networked approach of a microgrid, but also the potential of doing possibly smaller scale projects at just single facilities. So on that note, some potential project outcomes we're looking at are, as I said, reducing critical energy use at those facilities with energy efficiency beforehand, load shedding beforehand, and then a switching ability in an event. Co-locating renewable energy at critical facilities that may already have backup generation in place, but then these projects might then help stretch that emergency fuel supply. So, for example, if you had a diesel generator on site, but we're able to pair that with a solar array and a battery storage system, and then we're able to island from the grid, you might have all your bases covered and be able to serve that facility for a longer period of time. We're looking at an approach where municipalities might share assets sort of within their city or town, and also within a region. So looking at single buildings in a town, city or town, looking at multiple networked buildings within a city or town through a microgrid process, and then looking at a facility that might serve multiple cities and towns. So maybe a shelter that can serve, a number of surrounding communities. We also, while $40 million is a lot of money, we certainly want to make sure we're able to provide resources and information so that we're financing these projects in the best way possible, and all incentives and resources that are available statewide, sort of within DOER already and other agencies, but also federal funding. So certainly want to make sure we're being as cost effective as possible. So that leads to where we are now with this design and development. We, as I said, have been deep in the learning process. Connecticut has been a great example and a resource, so thank you in particular to Veronica. She took a lot of time to sort of walk me through their program, and certainly we're hoping to continue to learn from their best practices and lessons learned, and really model ourselves from their work and sort of apply it specifically to our circumstances. Here in Massachusetts, we've looked at a lot of the different technologies as well, sort of doing a fair amount of research there, as well as meeting with a lot of key stakeholders and experts in the same vein as Connecticut, sort of using as many resources as possible to incorporate recommendations, coordinate our efforts with sister agencies within the state, and then complement existing programs, both state and federal. So really trying to leverage everything we can. We have quite an aggressive schedule set out for us. We're looking to wrap up design of the program sort of this month, and we didn't coordinate this, but our schedule somewhat reflect the round 2 for Connecticut. Our solicitation should go out to cities and towns in March, and we'll be evaluating and implementing through the end of the year and into the start of next year. That brings me to sort of the key considerations in our approach. Some of the key things that came up in particular were the issue of energy resiliency planning in particular. There's a lot of talk about emergency planning, but this idea of resiliency is quite new, and we understand that. Some cities and towns in the Commonwealth have strategies in place already, or well-developed plans and even projects going, but some may not. So we're planning a program that can be flexible and allow for direct application for project funding, but also allow for planning technical assistance, and then sort of follow-on of project funding after that. And we'll we'll plan to enable that process by procuring a consulting technical assistant ourselves that will be then available for cities and towns to apply for those services. They don't have to procure their own expert, but we'll be providing that, and that technical assistance team can go out and help really plan projects well for these cities and towns. We're also very much focused on broad municipal equity across the Commonwealth. You know, there's a lot of considerations. Of course, we're trying to look at all the vulnerability factors here. So high population density certainly comes to mind quickly, but we also need to consider high-need individuals, the remote areas, flood risks, storm risks, or a broad list of things. And we hope that will help us make sure that we cover the needs of the entire state. And with that comes sort of regional cooperation. So we are planning to allow multiple municipalities to jointly apply for funding, and then even looking at potential mobile solutions. So a region might have some resources on hand that could be shared across municipalities. And then public-private partnerships as well. We're very interested in incorporating that sort of aspect. While this will be municipality-focused application, we do think that there's some value in municipalities being able to partner with private entities that serve a key role in emergencies, and they can then apply for the project and would have some arrangement to provide a critical service in that sort of event. Finally, we are looking at the possibility of arranging bulk purchasing for common technologies or equipment that might be used across many projects. So we're hoping that way municipalities can have access to the best pricing possible. If we can set that sort of thing up ahead of time, we think that will help the money go even further. So most importantly, though, we want to keep our mind on why we're doing this, and certainly, as Alex pointed out, days like today will remind us well, and we need to keep our heads out of the sand. With that, thank you very much for listening, and I do really look forward to answering any questions. Hopefully we'll have a good amount of time here today, but my email is here, my phone number. Please feel free to contact me. And sort of as Veronica said, we also have a contact list we're building, and we'll be sending updates on our program development as they become available. And yes, certainly interested in speaking to as many people as we can about this initiative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Two excellent presentations, and we do have a lot of questions, so I'm going to go through them as best I can. I'm going to ask that the answers be concise as possible, pithy, because we'll get to more questions that way. So, starting with a couple specifically for Connecticut. First one is, when microgrids are privately funded, what role, if any, will the municipality still have with prioritizing critical facilities?
That's a great question, Todd, and I think I can field this one. When we're talking about privately funded microgrids, when down the road 2 or 3 years, or however long it'll take, maybe even less, I think that the role that municipalities will have in guiding the selection of these will obviously have less explicit leverage over the selection of the site, but I think that there's still going to be a pretty strong rationale for municipal involvement because of management capabilities, because of access to capital. I think that the municipalities are going to be able to play a healthy role no matter if there is funding coming from the state or the municipality or not. I think you will see that being the case.
Okay. And another question for Connecticut. Can the Connecticut team talk more about using grants instead of loans or other state financing, such as tax credits?
Sure. Veronica, you want me to cover this one?
Go ahead. I'll fill in if you need me to.
Okay, so grants and loans instead of tax credits. I think that the idea with the creation of our program and its ratification in the legislature was to get results onto the ground in the fastest way possible. And I think that tax credits can certainly have an impact, but we wanted a flexible timeline and an approach that would allow us for implementation quickly, so we can start delivering these critical services to the residents of Connecticut on our time frame and when we see fit. So I think that's really why we went more toward the grant and loan. And to be perfectly blunt, because the legislature approved the governor's suggested budget of what will end up at the end of the day being $45 million, we're not going to turn that down. You know, if there is money being provided through the legislature, that's something, or being approved through the legislature, that is something that we're going to take advantage of. And it helps that it's a direct funding source.
I can just add on the generation side of it,
great.
though. I'm sorry, it's Veronica. On the generation side of that, if the generation is privately owned as opposed to municipal owned, the owners can avail themselves of whatever federal tax credits might be available for the generation side of it.
Great point.
Okay, great. I think I know the answer to this next one, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I think it's a great opportunity for you guys to talk about some of the alternative technologies. The question is, if there's no access to gas, natural gas, in a community for the microgrid, should a town or city not bother to submit?
That is a good question, and it is, you know, it's an issue. We in Connecticut are embarking on a gas availability expansion, but even when we get to our goals with that expansion plan, we're still going to have about 50% of the population covered, which will be on par with our friends in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and that leaves 50% of the state doesn't have gas access. There are increasingly promising opportunities with renewables. You know, I think that if we're being frank and looking at the options available to different municipalities with access to gas definitely have a leg up at this point. But as the business model for a renewable-driven microgrid becomes more and more viable, I think that you're going to start to see those options expanding outside of communities with access to gas.
Yeah, this might be a question that Amy, you might want to jump in on as well from the Massachusetts perspective, and maybe, you know, talk a little bit about the eligible technologies that are not necessarily gas-driven.
Yeah, certainly. There are some technologies that will be gas-driven. Sorry, as I said certainly CHP and fuel cells, but yeah, we're very, very interested in renewable technologies, and part of that is our funding source being ACP, which is Alternative Compliance Payment Funds, that dictates for us that we use these clean technologies, and part of that is certainly renewables. We, as I sort of outlined, think we want to look at a broad array of options and technologies, so where it's applicable and appropriate, I think things like PV arrays and other renewables are important, but again, certainly a natural gas tie-in will be helpful for some other options as well.
Okay, great. I should probably take this opportunity to say that one of the reasons that we at CESA with the ESTAP program are interested in helping support these state programs is that ultimately we're hoping for projects that come out of those state programs may be of interest to DOE, specifically with regard to energy storage. So if you don't have gas availability, you might want to look at PV with energy storage, or you know, other other renewables, biomass. I've seen hydro storage projects, and we would be very interested in supporting those potentially. Okay, next question. This again is with regard to Connecticut. Does the Green Bank, that would be CEFIA, have the authority to partner with private sector banks to leverage additional funding for projects?
Who threw that softball in there? The answer is yes, absolutely. We do. Our Green Bank was created for that very purpose, which is to kind of be the bubblegum and baling wire that interacts with private capital to get it moving in the marketplace. We don't necessarily, we want to avoid the situation where the Green Bank capital is what's called crowding out the private capital, but we want to be in a situation where the Green Bank is using tools, financing tools, creative financing tools to augment capital availability through private financing sources.
Okay, this one, we're going to switch over a little bit. This one is directed toward Amy from Massachusetts, but again, Connecticut folks jump in as it's probably relevant to you as well. The question is, what help can we get on the issue of islanding and microgrid when the towns are ready to act, but utility partners are not obliged to engage?
And that's a very good question. We're certainly working closely with utilities in Massachusetts, and there's sort of relevant to this is ongoing grid modernization hearings and investigations. So we know that that's certainly going to be a component in all of this, and I guess for now the best I can say is to stay tuned, and we're hoping to sort of provide as much information and resources as we can as we go along.
Hey Todd, I'd love to say a little bit about that from Connecticut's perspective. You know, there's conventional wisdom in the microgrid marketplace is that utilities are terrified of it and see it as a threat to their business model. And I got a report from Connecticut that the reality on the ground is a somewhat different story. There's some initial reluctance and hesitation from the big thinkers, the keepers of the business model at the utilities. But after some closer investigation, you know, it became clear that this is really an opportunity for utilities, and a long-term one, at a time when the market is really changing, when the landscape is shifting under their feet. It's potentially, it's a really good potential opportunity for utilities moving forward. So we can't say good enough things about our utility partners here in Connecticut. You know, we have two gentlemen by the name of Jim Mader and Dave Ferrante from our two major utilities who just knocked themselves out. You know, really couldn't have been more cooperative and going above and beyond the call of duty, working nights and weekends and getting the job done when it needs to get done. So I do want to push back against the somewhat conventional wisdom of utilities fight this with everything they have, because it's, at least in our case, not entirely true. Not true.
And this is Amy again.
Veronica.
Oh, sorry, Veronica, you go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. So I wanted to say also on the utilities part that while they're not in the business of designing these microgrids, they have assisted many project proponents so far, and continue to do so with fielding questions about how does this design work, how will it interconnect with your system, and working through any issues that might be there. So they're not only working with us, but they're working directly with the project proponents. So if you have something that you're interested in bouncing off the utility and you don't know who to contact, let Alex or I know, and we can give you their contact information directly, because they are working on an individual basis with anybody who's interested in putting together a microgrid.
And this is Amy again. I should say as well, we've had very good support already, even in the initial phases of our program from the utilities. So they certainly are supportive here as well, and do see this as a way to help the utilities in restoration process during an emergency. If they don't have to worry about you know, certain facilities or certain set of facilities, that certainly helps them out, and they're pleased with that arrangement as well. So I should say yes, we're very happy so far with our collaboration.
Thank you. We have a couple other questions on microgrids and utilities, so I'm just going to go ahead since we're on the topic, and maybe you can sort of address these together. So the questions are, elaborate on the role or potential role of the utilities in microgrid development and operation, and how will a utility interface with the microgrid in normal and abnormal events?
I'd love to take
Oh, go ahead.
Veronica, you go ahead.
Okay, so the utilities, as I mentioned in Connecticut, the utilities are very willing and able to work with any project proponent in answering questions about a particular design that somebody has come up with and how it will interact with their system, and maybe some ideas to make it better. They won't design the system for them, but they will work with them to answer questions and make sure that it will be a viable project. The utilities will continue to operate whatever is their assets. So anything behind the meter, the project component or the generation owner or the microgrid owner in general will operate those systems, and the utilities will still operate their own assets. So whatever distribution lines might be used for the microgrid, they'll still be operated by the EDC.
Yeah, I think that there's been a sort of a division by necessity of labor here, and the utilities have jumped into what we might call the high side of the operation versus the low side, which is sort of the behind the meter and operations that are generally taken by the applicant or the project owner. So that there's a pretty, out of necessity, we had to form this division, and it seems like it's pretty nice, crisp dichotomy.
Okay, anybody else on that one? Great. Sorry, Amy, did you want to say something?
No, I'm all set. I was just going to say I would defer to the expertise of Alex and Veronica on that one.
Okay. So this is kind of a different question, but I think it's interesting. The question is from both Massachusetts and Connecticut, have you considered local biofuel production in powering backup generators or fueling flex fuel emergency service vehicles?
No.
And we're certainly open to it. We haven't considered it specifically, but we are, as I said, looking at all renewable technologies, all clean technologies. So we're certainly open to consideration.
Okay. There was mention that I think it was Connecticut mentioned wanting to be working more closely with municipalities in round 2. Of course, there's already been one round of successful project funding, but as we're going into round 2, there's been an effort to work more closely and reach out to municipalities. So I think it would be helpful to just talk a little bit about, for both states, how are you going about working with municipalities, and for Massachusetts in particular, you mentioned municipal equity. If you could just explain what that means.
Amy, you want to start?
Sure, I can start off. So I guess first, by municipal equity, I just mean we want to reach a broad range of cities and towns. So we're not going to focus all of our efforts on Boston, for example, or just on Worcester or Springfield. We want to make sure we are hitting all the regions of the Commonwealth, be they large cities or smaller towns, and everything in between. So that's all I mean, making sure we make it possible for everyone to apply and consider projects from those cities and towns. And then as far as working with the municipalities, we sort of ongoing development of our outreach strategy, I guess you could call it. We know there's a ton of information here, and Connecticut has worked through this already. We want to we know a lot of the technology, for example, information is new. Financing and business models, that's all new and quite complicated as well. So we're trying to figure out the best way to do that. We have a Green Communities team here at DOER, which very lucky to have them, who have great access to the municipalities. We're also working with the RPAs, or our regional planning agencies, and other state agencies that sort of have the access to municipalities and can sort of get us in touch with the right people. We also want to make sure, as well as providing that technical assistance portion of this, as I mentioned earlier, that as the solicitation goes out, we provide sort of a toolkit or information guide that has a lot of background information. And we also plan to host bidder seminars, I suppose, webinars, but sort of much more informational, so both from us on the policy side and sort of logistical side of things, but then also the technical side, and we plan to have our technical assistance consultant help us out with that as well. So we're still finalizing all the details, but we're hoping to cover all our bases and do as much outreach and information providing as we can.
In Connecticut, I think first and foremost, the access to that information would come through me. My phone line and my email is always open. I field these questions to get the people to the proper people that can answer those questions. So whether it's from the utilities or some other expert help we have. But we have so many partners on our program now. We've mentioned the work with the utilities, so any help that they can provide, you can contact them directly. We have our technical consultant who has been invaluable to us in understanding the technical aspects of the microgrids, but they are also going to be hosting a webinar in the near future directly for people to understand how microgrids work. CESA Todd has offered assistance to projects that would be wanting to include storage, which the more renewable generation we put into these projects, it's probably going to be a bigger need to have storage. They do have some limited funding that they can potentially help projects with that aspect of it. I've mentioned Pace University has offered up technical assistance. They held a webinar last year. I'm not sure that link is on our website. I know we have sent it out to people, but you can call me to find out who to contact there. And they have limited amount of technical assistance to offer up in the designing of the project. Alex, who am I missing here? Of course, Cephia for the financing of the project. So there's many partners that we have that if you contact us directly, we can get you in touch with the proper people to help with potentially designing the projects, fielding questions from all different sources.
Okay. You go ahead.
No, I was just telling Veronica, I think she covered it.
Oh, good. So I'm going to suggest that since we have a large number of unanswered questions yet to go, that we stretch this hour a little bit. So if you're still listening, and a lot of you are, and we haven't gotten to your question and you have a little more time, just stick with us. We will continue for a few minutes and try to get to a few more questions. And also I wanted to suggest that we put up the slide with the link to our website where the presentation will be archived so that people can get that. Thank you. In case they do need to get off and they want to come back later and listen to the rest of the discussion. Okay, so a couple of questions which are really crucial about legislative and regulatory support for some of these projects. And I'll preface this by saying I believe in Connecticut there was a change to the law to allow municipal microgrids to send electricity across public streets, which was necessary to avoid having some of these projects violate utility franchise. And so the question is, in Massachusetts and Connecticut, what's the time frame for what's needed in terms of regulatory support for islanding and microgrids? Are the state governments going to be able to support the regulatory changes needed, immediately? And are the governor's offices, supporting it? Is the DPU on board? What kind of legislative action is required? Probably, I'm guessing that this has been dealt with already in Connecticut to a large degree since we've already been through one round, but I don't know the answer for Massachusetts, so maybe that's something that Amy could speak to.
Sure, I can get us started from Connecticut's perspective. We have, you alluded to a bill that was passed in our legislature that did allow for municipalities to traverse right-of-ways in order to construct microgrids. And, that was more just technical cleanup than it was any sort of, massive driving necessity. I think that there's a general spirit of let's get this done that has pervaded the process so far, and the reason for that legislation was just to get on the books for the record. We have, again, there's the conventional wisdom that franchise rights are a huge block to every project, and there's, it's not without truth completely. There are some places where it just is something that can't be overcome. But for the most part, we found that where there's a will, there's a way, and creative solutions for individual projects have allowed us to move forward. But I'm interested to hear Massachusetts take.
I think at this point, we're sort of in a similar boat as Alex was just saying that where there's a will, there's a way. The utilities have been very supportive of us, and we're not necessarily exclusively focused on microgrids, so it might not be as big an issue at the moment. We are, as I said, working closely with the utilities, and they're very supportive as sort of assessing projects as they come up. If we are doing projects that are a single facility, a lot of time that is going to be behind the grid, so none of this is really a big issue. We're expecting some projects that might be looking to do a broader networked microgrid, and as Alex says, will sort of be considered on an as needed basis, and sort of assess the situation and collaborate with the utilities as best we can. So that's where we stand in Massachusetts at the moment.
Great. Here's a question about transparency. How much information is shared after the project is built? And along the same lines, is there value in an open data sharing platform with an independent analysis component? How are you, since these are sort of partly publicly funded projects, how are you handling issues of transparency and data sharing?
So in Connecticut, we in the first round, we identified out at a general level what our review criteria and such were. We did not publish the actual evaluation matrices that were our internal workings, and we did have some questions on that. And so in the second round, we are looking to be more explicit in what our review criteria are. And we're also having this set of pass-fail threshold criteria. So it should be pretty clear in the end as to why projects that were selected, were in fact selected, by being as transparent as we can with the criteria that we're using to evaluate the project.
And I guess we're sort of in such a development phase that we're not sort of being decided on that issue for Massachusetts. But we'll certainly keep everyone informed.
Okay. Specifically for Massachusetts, does a municipality in Mass have to work with the State Energy Department's selected vendors, or can communities choose their own vendors to plan and implement solutions?
I guess, again, I'd say don't necessarily have anything set in stone, but no, I don't think there would be any restrictions on working with an outside vendor for the planning process or the actual project itself. So no, I don't think there would be any restrictions there.
Okay, and another Massachusetts question that you may or may not have decided at this point. Will funding for studies be available for towns to engage their own technical consultant, or can they only access the state's selected consultant? Will you select one or qualify multiple planning consultants?
Our plan at this point is to provide funding for our procure our own consultant that would serve as the official technical assistant. We wouldn't provide funding to towns to go out and then get their own. So it would just be this one source of technical assistance. But I guess I'm blanking on the rest of the question. But yeah.
I would say from Connecticut's
I
experience.
think you got it. Okay.
Todd, from Connecticut's experience, you know, we have a technical consultant, a fellow by the name of Bill Morana at TRC, who's been great. But outside of Bill, you know, this has been a Connecticut state government story. This has been our team under Veronica's leadership working to get all this done, and we're very proud of keeping it mean and lean, and we plan on continuing to do so.
Okay. For both states, how are you dealing with the tendency by T&D utilities to apply standby charges on private or semi-private microgrids?
So in Connecticut, we are not doing standby charges. They're the regular tariffs. All customers on a microgrid are still customers of the utility in whatever form they were in. There's no specific microgrid tariff or anything at the moment. So whatever the existing tariffs are that individual customers on the microgrid will use, those will continue to be used when they are actually on the microgrid. All the billing will still be done by the utilities. Everything remains the same except for where the power comes from in the event of an island situation.
And for Massachusetts, I wouldn't say we've made any sort of concrete decisions or seen this as a big issue for us yet, but I suspect that we'll sort of follow in the same vein as Connecticut.
Okay. Here's a question that is no doubt of interest to a lot of municipalities who may be interested in your programs. How do you expect municipalities to create funds for generational equipment? And by that I take it the questioner wants to know how to finance generation if the state is not. The questioner goes on to say there seems to be a lot of confusion about that. Any guidelines you can suggest?
Okay, from Connecticut then, this is a problem that was much more in the first round. Hopefully will be lessened in our second round. Is that how do you fund the generation? And we're giving everybody, all the municipalities, the opportunity to work with CEFIA and work with the Green Bank to understand what projects they're looking to do, what setups they're looking to do, generation they're looking to use, so that CEFIA can help them find access to appropriate funding and make their project cost beneficial. That potentially they'll have cash outlay, potentially not. Whatever those arrangements are, we understand that that's a huge stumbling block for the municipalities that don't have access to capital right on hand. But there's always, they could, potentially bond money out for their own projects. But really hoping that they'll work with CEFIA or whatever, working with a private developer. They might make their own arrangements through an energy services agreement or something to have the microgrid funded, so they're not, the municipalities themselves aren't doing the huge cash outlays.
And this is Amy from Massachusetts. What we're looking at is incorporating a lot of the incentive programs and resources that we have in place already. So DOER, for example, has incentives for solar arrays. We have programs for CHP, partnering with utilities on that. So we do have a lot in place already. And then using partners like CESA to look at storage, and then, as Veronica said, sort of the potential of partnering with private entities to fund sort of different generation projects. So we're hoping to really utilize what is out there already and help our municipalities learn about all of those opportunities.
Okay, and I wanted to mention that Clean Energy Group, which is our sort of parent organization at CESA, just yesterday released a new report that we did for the city of Baltimore on resilient power, and it mentioned, it lists a bunch of financing strategies for municipalities, and maybe Maria or Samantha can help me out with the name of that report. It's
the Clean Energy for Resilient Communities report, and it's actually also posted and highlighted on the cleanenergystates.org homepage. So if anyone just goes to www.cleanenergystates.org, they'll see the report there, and it is a first in-depth review of national policies and finance strategies to use solar and energy storage to provide power protection in an urban setting. So it should be of interest to quite a few of you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Maria. It does have a lot of really interesting information about financing options that are available to municipalities, to schools, to nonprofits, for low-income area, residential buildings, and so forth. So depending on your area of interest, you may find something there. Okay, I'm going to take a couple more questions here, and then I think we're going to have to wrap this up. This is a question for Connecticut, but Massachusetts again may want to jump in. What T&D utility role must project project proposers secure in order to demonstrate the ability to link community facilities that are not co-located? I hope that was clear.
Can you say that again?
Yeah. So the question is, what T&D utility role must project proposers secure in order to demonstrate the ability to link community facilities that are not co-located? So I think what they're saying is, if you're trying to link facilities that aren't co-located in a microgrid, what do you have to do to show that the local utility is participating such that those can be linked in a microgrid within the distribution system?
So it's pretty streamlined in our program because we do have we're a very close partnership with the fellows I mentioned earlier from the utilities who are leading teams over at the utilities. We're looking at and evaluating each individual project that comes in. So it's baked into the evaluation process for Connecticut.
In addition to that, as part of our process, as part of the submissions that the proposals have to send in is an interconnection agreement application with the utilities, so that we know that they have involved the utilities, they've looked at the system, it's technically, viable, and as we said, to work with them on a one-on-one basis with making sure that the design won't interfere with the utility system at all. So they're involved in an individual level, and then specifically when the project component submits an interconnection application with the utility, there'll be a more in-depth review that the utilities will undertake to make sure the system is viable.
And for Massachusetts, we again
have. Sorry, go ahead, Amy.
I was going to say, for Massachusetts, again, we haven't quite finalized any of that, but it is looking to be quite similar to Connecticut, where interconnection agreement will be part of the process, so that will certainly be required. And yeah, we'll be looking, and utilities will be looking at evaluating each project as it comes in. So it'll be sort of an individual basis as well.
Okay, and Amy, are SREC 2 projects going to be eligible for these grants?
Well, I guess I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, but certainly a project that incorporates generation that would be SREC 2 qualified would be able to be part of a energy resiliency project, certainly. So we're looking to complement all of our existing incentives, as I said.
All right. In other words, there's no double dipping issue with a project that's already getting an SREC to get also a resiliency grant.
Well, I suppose in the sense that we wouldn't be using, the project couldn't sort of look for funding for the generation in that case, and but the rest of the projects, certainly islanding equipment, things like that, would be eligible for funding under our grant, and then could be connected to an SREC generation facility.
Okay, great. It's 22 after actually, and we've sort of stretched this as long as I think we can stretch it. I apologize for those people that didn't get their questions answered. If you have a burning issue that didn't get addressed, feel free to email it to me. My email is on the screen, todd@cleanegroup.org. I'll forward it. I'll either answer it if I can or forward it to the appropriate person in Connecticut or Massachusetts, if that's okay with them. And for those of you who may want to review this, again, it will be posted on our website shortly at cleanenergystates.org/events in its entirety with the audio, and feel free to send that link to anybody who may not have been able to join us due to the weather or other responsibilities today. So thanks everybody. That was a really excellent discussion. Thanks to our presenters. Any last words from Connecticut or Massachusetts?
I think we're good.
Just thank you for having me. It was really great.
Okay. And Maria, do you need to say anything?
No, we're good.
Okay. Well, thanks to everybody for sticking with us, and the turnout was great. I'm going to bring this to a close.